Everyone.
Hey everyone, this is the Kubeflow community call for the 16th of December 2025, the first one on the new calendar, and I think that's the first topic. But before we do that, as usual, we're a CNCF project, and we follow the CNCF Code of Conduct. Be nice to each other. So, I think Andre was literally just talking about Zoom, and do you want to talk
Yeah,
about
just
it?
before we jump to this, any new people here on the call,
Oh,
if you
okay, yeah.
just want to say hello, introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm new. I'm Savin. I'm one of the maintainers for Metaflow, and we've been working on a Metaflow Kubeflow integration, and that's the reason for my attendance today.
Welcome, Seven.
Thank you.
Welcome. Anyone else who's new want to say hi?
Yeah, I'm also new. I'm Madhur. I actually work with Savin, and I'm one of the developers of this integration.
Cool. Anyone else want to say hi?
Hello everyone, my name is Saurabh. I work with Savin and Madhur, and I'm here to, just join the community and say, be involved.
Awesome. Welcome. Anyone else want to say hi? We got lots of people. Okay, looks like awesome. So it looks like some people found the new meeting at least. Okay, and Andre, do you want to quickly explain what's happening with the new meeting for people who can't find it?
Yes. So yeah, as we announced previously, we fully migrated to the LFX calendar for all the Qflow meetings, which for all the working groups meetings and this community call. So Matthew link the new meeting invite for this event. I think we also can link the public calendar that folks can see all the meetings and register if they're interested. I will
Yeah.
edit
Oh
right
yeah, you
here.
do that. Yeah. And so you can register for specific meetings, and then you will get added an actual email invite, which is probably what you should do. Uh,
Yes. Yeah, all of the meetings will be recorded, and also we have like way to publish them automatically on YouTube, so which is pretty great. I think on this page we also, yes, like as Maju showed, you can register on the call. Um,
and then once
and
you
I
register,
guess
there'll
yeah.
be a button down here. So
Yeah. That's right.
this one I
Um,
probably have. There you go. Yep. And if you need a meeting, so yeah, any other comments about this? What else do we need people to do?
I think if you have any questions, let us know, problems to join the calls, because we're trying to find a way how to explain people how to join those calls easily. So I know Valentina is working on to have a sort of, like icon at the Kubeflow.org to point people to the community section. We also have done some changes to the community website to explain how people can join the calls. But we try to kind of like minimize, previously when you join Kubeflow Discuss, you automatically get a lot of invites, but we try to get rid of this because some of the minis got legacy, like absolute, and they no longer exist. So this calendar will have actual information. So please follow it. Yep.
It also lets us cancel meetings more easily for specific days, I think. You can like stop one for Christmas, let's say.
Yep.
It's like that. Cool. Hopefully it all works smoothly. I think there's still one meeting I haven't deleted yet because you wanted to split it up, Andre, but we'll do that after.
Yeah. Which call? Sorry.
I think that was the auto ML.
Oh yeah. So yeah, we for AutoML we're gonna have two different calendar zones. Yeah.
Okay,
We
let's
it's
let's
fine.
let's
Like we
put that
can
in.
follow up this.
Changes to meetings. There was two or three changes, right? We merged the manifest security release meetings to bi-weekly on Monday at what is it again? 10 a.m. Pacific or 8 a.m. 9 a.m. Not
Yeah. So like this, the platform call, right? It's 9 a.m. I think on Monday, right, Valentina, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's in East. Let me see the other time zone. I don't know if that's available. Trying to check.
so we also moved the Spark operator
Um,
meeting as well, right?
yeah,
Yeah, I
no,
wanted
it's
to talk about
11. Yeah.
Spark. I want to talk about Spark
Oh,
after
okay,
the
let's do this.
Metaflow demo a
Okay.
little bit. Yeah.
But it's a Friday at 9, right? Or is it 10?
Yeah, it's 9 a.m. on Friday. Yep.
And then one more as well. You just said we split the Auto ML working group Katib. What's it? Katib, is it now a mixture of things? Katib and what?
Yeah, Trainer and Katiba have the same call. I think maybe during the demo I can link all the meeting notes here for all the calls so people can follow. But we have the same time for Trainer and Katib the same time, but we have a new Zoom link, right?
What's the time so we can just put it in there?
Yeah, it's 6 a.m. PST and
But in what day?
yeah, so it's bi-weekly, bi-weekly Wednesday, 6 a.m. PST, 9 a.m. PST. So the next one will be probably next week if you're not going to cancel it on 24th because it's almost Christmas. So I think it's a better way here, Martin. Maybe people can just follow calendar or our Slack channel.
Yep.
I will link. Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight the ones that have changed because some of them have
Mhm.
moved, which is just these three, I think, are the only ones that I was aware of. But other than that, yep, we can probably move on. I just want to confirm I got the Spark Rapid one right. Did I? Is it monthly? Or is it bi-weekly?
No, it's like bi-weekly. I can talk about Spark after Metaflow demo. Like I think there are several
Okay, cool.
things I want to give updates for
So to
that.
make sure you are aware that you can join these meetings, I just want to highlight that to people. So click the ones that you want to register on. Anyone else got any other things they want to call out here while we're talking about the calendar?
Yeah, I can mention also that we have the meeting yesterday, and we decided to cancel the next meeting, which will be December 29 because of the holidays. So I added a note on the meeting notes about this. I don't know if there is a way to cancel that
Yes.
specific meeting.
Yes, there is. You should be able to do it. If you can't, we should fix it.
I cannot.
Which one are you saying we canceled? Sorry.
The
Oh, that one.
29, yeah, this one.
Okay, we should make sure that you're able to do that. Maybe DM Andre, he should help you.
Okay.
Cool. But yes, we should do that. We should delete any meetings that are going to be not there so that people don't turn up and and feel lonely. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, also, anyone else got anything they want to raise before we hand off to a demo?
I need to jump in like 30 minutes. I don't know how long is the demo, but I want to provide some updates on the release.
I mean, is how long are your updates? If they're quick, then I guess.
It's 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, then
less.
probably yeah.
Should I go? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Perfect. So yesterday we have our first March meeting, as we were discussing with the Kubeflow manifest, and the Kubeflow platform AI release meeting. So I added a link to register to the meeting. So small the notes. Let me see if I can make it bigger.
I'll just highlight it for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
There you go.
Right. So we had the discussion. I checked with all the working groups. All the working groups approved moving forward with the release. So we had the decision go, no go. It was a go. So we have a new release. So thank you so much, everyone who contributed to this release, especially, big shout out to Julius, who was leading this effort and also, reminding us that we needed to do this. So we have a social post I'm working on right now. I am asking for validation between all the working groups if there is anything we need to highlight. So we will wait until the end of the day. So if you have anything you want us to highlight, just let me know. Add a note in the meeting notes, and then we also working right now towards updating the website documentation. Julius have a PR we already merged on the installation. We need to update the documentation and the drop down. But also we have asked the working groups to work on the slides as we usually do. So the slides is there. So the slides will have the highlights for the features of all the working groups have been working on. Also, there is a video that we are looking for to to have for each working group talking and presenting all these features. So the idea is to have these slides by the end of the year, before the end of the year, and the videos, if possible, before the end of the year. But otherwise, the videos could be at the beginning of January. We know everyone is focused on the holidays and finishing a lot of the early commitments you have. So reach out if you need, more time with the slides or if you have any questions. Tarek offered to help with the blog as well. Like he offered to be the PM, the product manager for this release. So he will be working once we have all the slides with all the information, he will be putting together a blog. So he may reaching out. Mateo also, he will be working on putting together all the videos. So thank you so much, Mateo. So once we have all the videos, Mateo may reach out to you. So thank you. He did this in the last release. So thank you so much again. And I think because we had a new release, I added the link. So we are looking for feedback. And I think that's all I have. Julius, do you want to add anything? I don't know if you're here.
Yes, it's just a really great release, massive new features. Please enjoy. It's really a long-term effort from multiple working groups. I think some of the items here are tackled for 4 years now, and they finally made it into the stable release.
Do you want to quickly list the most important things, or do we just want to say them out here?
Yeah, I think there are there.
Okay.
Well, yeah, go ahead,
Or
Julius.
do they, or someone?
Well, you can also do so, Valentina, but I think the main technical change that was planned for, I think, 4 or 5 years was the switch from Minero to CVDFS, which also had to be done because now it's abandoned in the open source community. That also means hard multi-tenancy for the S3 storage with separate credentials per namespace. Then we have the Kubernetes best practices with pod security standards. And just in general, a lot of scalability improvements that actually contributed by multiple companies using it, such that you can really scale to, I think, around 1,000 namespaces or users. I think these are the highlights for me, but for someone else, it might be different.
Cool.
Yeah, and again, if there is anything else you want us to highlight on the social post, let us know. I will please add a comment there where it says social post, and we will make sure we'll include it. And thanks everyone for
Cool.
working on this. Yeah.
So I guess the
Thank
next
you.
release we're planning now, Ellie? Yes.
Well, we need to finish all the documentations, videos, and we are close to the holidays. So yeah, we will reconvene in January, but we will continue in being in touch, during the next weeks offline, just to ensure we have all the documentation, like the slides, the videos, the website up to date. After this, we will start planning the next release.
Yeah, I think it seems pretty likely we would probably target KubeCon, I guess, for the next one, right? But
Yeah, we
Yeah.
discussed that before, so.
and maybe even use the new versioning thing, but we'll see.
Yeah, and the new versioning thing, Kubeflow dashboard and notebooks version 1 update, maybe even the V2 alpha release.
Yep, that's the goal. I was saying Notebooks 2.0 should hopefully have an alpha release in the next one. It doesn't have an alpha release in this one, to be clear.
Yeah, amazing. So Matthew, I mentioned to Andy that if you want to use the last video or create a new video, even though we are shipping the previous version, you can take the opportunity to talk about those features and then talk about what's coming. So let us know what you want to do.
Is the tag actually cut now, Julius?
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's there. The link is there. Yeah.
Okay, so the Notebooks version hasn't changed then. Anyway, we should oh, someone's got their hand up. Person with their hand up.
Hi, this is Jagjivan from my side. So this is my one of the first meet. So I recently started contributing. So I was trying to patch some security issues related to S3 and blob storage. So while testing, I found that some of the React components are getting the APIs which are provided by React are getting outdated, we need to patch that, I think,
So
because I'm seeing
which component are you talking about? Sorry?
React components.
No.
There
Which
are
part of Kubeflow? Like Kubeflow pipelines or notebooks?
pipeline.
Oh, okay. So I
In
recommend
pipeline, we need to update some of the code because there some of the things are getting deprecated. So
so
in
this
place
is
time, seeing
yeah. So I recommend you that's really if you're able to help, I strongly recommend you attend the new pipelines meeting. Well, it's not new, it's the same one as always was. And talk to people there, or just open issues and communicate with people on the Slack channels and make sure that you can get, if you've got time to fix problems, that's usually what the best strategy is. This is obviously like an overall community
okay,
meeting.
thank you.
But yeah, so there's a pipeline specific meeting. So it's at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays Pacific time. Also, you can also just talk in the Slack channel if that time doesn't work.
Yeah, sorry.
But no, it's good. I'm just
No
highlighting.
issue. No issue. No issue.
Awesome. Yeah. But also, I think someone in the Slack, sorry, in the messages was saying that you can that they're planning to prioritize it. So if you want to help, please do. So there's someone in the messages for the meeting. Okay, cool. Let's move back because we have a demo and I don't want to cut their time too short. But anything else before we quickly jump back, Valentino?
Yeah, you need to take a look at the website, Matthew. I think we need to update some shortcodes that the latest version 1.11 is shown on the website as well in the drop-down menu.
Yeah, so that requires a couple of changes. Yeah. There's like a DNS change that needs to take place as well. We need to actually cut a branch, and then we need to make sure that we've cherry-picked all of the things into that branch and then archived the old one. I think there's a flow list somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. I can start working on it, Matthew. But I remember the last time
It's pretty
we were
painful.
on.
It is pretty.
Yeah,
So like we need to it might there is a
I don't
list
know.
somewhere,
Yeah,
but there's a list somewhere. But I mean, we can let's just plan out what we're gonna do, and then we just say if there's anything missing, and then I can probably tell you if there's something missing. Maybe just like write out a list
yeah,
of what you plan to do.
yeah. I'm happy to do a one-on-one. So if you want to,
That's fine too.
like,
Yeah, we can.
let me know how. Because I remember the last time I was trying to figure out, I couldn't. So
Yeah,
I will get a
it's
different.
very weird. But yes, okay, cool. We should document
Great.
whatever we do though. Let's make a doc for whatever we do.
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, cool. Let's go. Anything else? Let's go to the demo, I guess.
All
Metaflow.
right. Can I share my screen?
You should be able to.
It
Oh, I
says
need to stop sharing. There we go.
yeah. Let's see. All right. Is everybody able to see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So before I start, how much are you familiar with Metaflow here?
I think since this is a community meeting, just assume that you're presenting to an audience of mixed people, right? You know, some people who are, yeah, that's what I.
Okay, sounds good. Let's do that. So thanks for the invitation to present in this meeting. So there's some recent work that we have executed on that sort of like brings many of the Metaflow functionality on top of the Kubeflow ecosystems, more specifically Kubeflow pipelines, and we have plans to sort of like integrate deeply with the Kubeflow trainer notebook and sort of like the model registry aspects of it as well. And let me just do a very quick primer into what Metaflow is, what is the philosophy. I'm pretty sure, many people might have sort of like come across the question of like, okay, should we consider Metaflow or should we consider Kubeflow? And now sort of like, when you see this integration, an open question is that, okay, what does this even sort of like mean? So hopefully sort of like at the end of this conversation, everybody would be sort of like a bit wiser here. So the background for Metaflow basically started at Netflix close to a decade ago, where we were trying to basically figure out what is the platform that can sort of like support our needs well beyond sort of like recommendation systems that Netflix is already sort of like well known for. You can imagine sort of like a large company of the scale of Netflix invests in sort of like many different areas when it comes to ML and AI, and it had sort of like, a very large team of ML researchers and AI engineers. And the goal for us was to sort of like, basically figure out what is that sort of like platform layer that we can sort of like offer. And our understanding at that point, and that sort of like, remains true to this date as well, is that there are sort of like the actual capabilities that the technology offers. Of course, sort of like, everybody is now familiar with everything that the LLMs and reasoning models have been able to sort of like achieve. But then there is sort of like a big, massive gap between sort of like, how the capabilities that these production AI projects sort of like bring to the table versus sort of like what is theoretically possible. And for us, the goal was that, okay, as an organization, there is immense appetite to build as many of these AI projects as possible. But then there's also a significant appetite to make sure that these are sort of like, truly at the bleeding edge. But anytime you sort of like, start executing on any of these AI projects, it sort of like, just takes a lot of time to sort of like get anything done. And the key understanding was that, okay, what sort of like, leads to this productivity gap? And that's where sort of like Metaflow came in. So let me just like take sort of like, a very simple generic example that everybody can sort of like recognize and sort of like use that as a motivating case of how sort of like Metaflow works. So let's assume that we have a researcher. That researcher is maybe sort of like, tasked with a certain specific sort of like project. So in this case, they need to sort of like, let's say, utilize LLMs to do some credit risk modeling, sort of like, predict whether a particular prospect is at a risk of defaulting or not. And now, in any organization, when you're looking at solving any of these problems, of course, there is sort of like an assumption that is being made that you already have sort of like your data in good order. You have made sort of like investments in a data platform. Maybe you're a customer of Snowflake, Databricks. Maybe you're sort of like invested in some sort of like, open data ecosystem, maybe sort of like backed by Iceberg or something. And
Oh,
then the other big, yeah,
one thing, can you just like maximize your screen? Someone's saying they can't read it. Like, yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah.
Let me do this.
There
This
you
is
go.
what, okay,
There you go.
wonderful. Yep. Sorry for that. And then, of course, organizations now sort of like have very easy access to the cloud. You have access to Kubernetes. You have access to sort of like, dedicated accelerated hardware, many times sort of like GPUs, TPUs coming from sort of like many of these vendors. And now basically what this researcher is doing is that they are basically using many of the tooling, many of the components that are already available in the open source ecosystem or sort of like available from vendors. And they're basically trying to connect this data to this compute and basically sort of like get their work done. So in this scenario, maybe sort of like, one of the first things that this user may want to do is access all of the data that's available, maybe sort of like, generate some embeddings or run some sort of like analysis just by sort of like hitting OpenAI API endpoints. In some other cases, they may sort of like, want to go out and sort of like build their own models or sort of like, fine tune their own models. So like a variety of different approaches, a variety of different experiments that the user sort of like, would want to do to sort of like get their work done. And I mean, if you've been using Kubeflow, I mean, I would hope that, this is sort of like something that you're sort of like very well um, aware of, like, the mechanism with which sort of like all of this happens. And where sort of like Metaflow comes in is basically it's sort of like, this connecting substrate that sort of like connects your investments in data, your investments in compute. So it sort of like, does all your orchestration and choreography. But the big thing that it sort of like optimizes for over anything else is the developer experience, because at the end of the day, it's your researcher, it's your data scientist who is responsible for doing this experimental work. And the big sort of like, element that sort of like always comes up is that how quickly are they able to actually sort of like get anything done? Are the APIs and is the experience sort of like something that is very idiomatic for them or not? And keeping that sort of like in mind, our sort of like worldview there is that, of course, you have your developer experience, and then you need to sort of like, lean in your existing investments in data, compute, and orchestration to be able to sort of like build up these production systems. And Metaflow is an open source project. We open sourced this close to 6 years ago. So if you're curious, you can sort of like go to github.com/netflix/Metaflow. There's sort of like open source documentation as well. And at the end of the day, it sort of like, is an opinionated interface that allows your users to author these workloads. In most cases, these workloads sort of like, look like DAGs. And there are like multiple capabilities that sort of like allows these folks to basically iterate on these workloads quite effectively in sort of like local development mode. So they can sort of like author these sort of like individual nodes of these tags. They can sort of like, specify what is the set of dependencies that they want to use, if they want to bring in sort of like custom second party, third party packages, if they want to sort of like bundle in custom visualization. So all of that is sort of like available to them in sort of like in a Pythonic ecosystem. But then once they have something that sort of like looks meaningful, many times they might be beholden to the limits that their sort of like laptop enforces, right? Like if my laptop doesn't have GPUs, no matter sort of like whatever capabilities are available here, I just cannot run that workload. And in that scenario, then we basically enable them to lift parts of their workload or the entirety of that workload and run it transparently in the cloud. And we'll basically sort of like stream back all the logs for them. So basically the experience at the end of the day would be that, somehow sort of like they're still running everything locally, but sort of like the execution is sort of like happening behind the scenes, and we just sort of like are able to stream all the information back for them. And then that sort of like allows them to run really large scale workloads, allows them to run sort of like distributed training workloads. And the key thing here is that with our abstraction, we try to abstract away the fact that, you're basically sort of like relying on Kubernetes, or you need to sort of like have an in-depth understanding of sort of like how Kubernetes functions. Once you have this workload available, then many times you may want to operate this workload in production. You may want to sort of like, let's say run this workload every night when new data shows up, or you may want to run this workload when new models are available. And in that scenario, you're able to basically deploy this on top of, let's say, a production orchestrator. And that's where Kubeflow pipelines comes in, where you can now sort of like start defining your flows with Metaflow. And once you're sort of like happy with that, then you can basically sort of like push them over into Kubeflow pipelines. And then they become sort of like part of your larger Kubeflow pipeline universe. And in that sort of like mechanism, you get to sort of like enjoy all the benefits of Kubeflow pipelines, as well as sort of like the developer experience that Metaflow offers. Um, I can just like quickly go through what the user experience looks like here. So it's sort of like it's a fully Pythonic interface, and we rely sort of like quite heavily on decorators. So any functions that you have in your class, when you annotate those with the step decorator, they basically become nodes in your graph. And then using the self.next call, you can basically sort of like define what the edges are. So that sort of like, makes it sort of like rather trivial for people to specify the structure of their DAG. And then the interesting element that we do here is that anytime you execute this flow, we will automatically snapshot the entire state and store that in perpetuity in blob storage, so that you can sort of like go back in time and understand sort of like, what workload was running, who ran it, what was the code, and you can basically reproduce that entire execution. And then we go sort of like one level further, where anything that is, let's say, an instance variable. So for example, in this case, if you define self.x, then we'll actually sort of like snapshot all of these values for you and store these in blob storage as well. So you can imagine sort of like, these can be sort of like any arbitrary Python objects. These can be your models. These can be sort of like any intermediate state, your logs and whatnot. And then that sort of like as a side effect creates sort of like this really nice model registry for us, as well as sort of like, then it supports time travel. And then you can sort of like then go back and say that, hey, um, let's say my coworker ran this workload 6 months ago. Can I sort of like actually replay that compute from an arbitrary point? Can I sort of like change some code and then sort of like, start running that from any sort of like arbitrary point? Um, in this case, you can see sort of like, we have this add Kubernetes decorator. So what this decorator basically does here is that now if you define this decorator, then when you run this workload, then the start step will run locally, but this Kubernetes step will actually run as a Kubernetes pod on top of your Kubernetes cluster. And at that moment, you don't really sort of like need to understand what kubectl is, or sort of like any of the deeper sort of like knowledge of the Kubernetes ecosystem, but you have sort of like the full part and flexibility of that ecosystem available to you. We have like many other sort of like features as well that might be sort of like a bit too much to cover in this call. But before I start with some code samples, I'd like to just pause here for any questions or any sort of like specific area where you all may want to sort of like dive deep on. Yes, Anya.
Yeah, I'm just curious, why do we need this integration with Metaflow if we have Kubeflow pipelines, which solves the ML workflow orchestration as well? Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. Excellent question. So basically, that was a question for us as well. And we have had sort of like a number of teams come to us saying that they really like sort of like many components of the Kubeflow ecosystem. And they would also want to be able to run Metaflow workloads on top of the Kubeflow ecosystem. Of course, when you look at, let's say, the Kubeflow pipelines SDK, there's sort of like a good degree of overlap between the capabilities that sort of like Metaflow provides versus sort of like what the Kubeflow pipeline SDK offers. So you can sort of like imagine this is sort of like one additional mechanism of sort of like running your workloads or authoring your workloads. But then at the end of the day, these workloads sort of like compile down into the intermediate representation that Kubeflow pipeline sort of like already offers. There are certain areas where we sort of like go quite deep into, where we sort of like take a perspective into some of the things that, let's say, AI engineers and ML researchers would need on, like, how would you want to, let's say, visualize and track your custom experiments? How would you want to, let's say, work within sort of like larger teams and sort of like do namespacing of your experiments and artifacts and things of that nature that are sort of like slightly different than, let's say, the concept of namespaces that Kubernetes sort of like offers.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you. I'd love to see the examples, how that might look like.
Yes, definitely. Julius?
Yeah, I'm also interested in the architecture. So in Kubeflow, we have the multi-tenant model by namespaces. Here you have different backends, whether it's Kubeflow pipelines or Airflow or whatever. What is your architectural model there?
Yeah. So like Metaflow has sort of like many other components as well, just like sort of like the Kubeflow project. Specifically, when we talk about, let's say, the interaction between Metaflow and Kubeflow pipelines, you can imagine sort of like Metaflow more or less sort of like behaves as a client library, where it would then sort of like compile whatever workload you're sort of like authoring in Metaflow into an internal representation that sort of like Kubeflow pipelines accepts. And if you are, let's say, interested in deploying into a specific namespace and other bits, then those are all sort of like fully supported.
I
So
was
basically sort of like inherit the execution model as well as sort of like all the multi-tenancy characteristics that the underlying infrastructure sort of like offers. So that sort of like is one sort of like dimension. And then in many ways, you can imagine many times end users also want sort of like a different logical separation. So you can imagine, let's say, if I'm authoring my workloads, then anytime I do an experiment, I maybe sort of like, some of these experiments may not need to run on top of Kubernetes, or maybe I don't even need to sort of like push them on top of Kubeflow pipelines, but still those experiments need to be accessible by other users as well. So those are like some of the capabilities that sort of like that Metaflow layers on top.
Do you have then some kind of user management included?
So basically, we'll piggyback on top of Kubeflow's user management in this case. Humair.
Yeah, hi. So you briefly talked about the intermediate representation. Um, does you said that you converted to one that the Kubeflow pipelines will accept. So does MLflow have its own intermediate representation, and you would just have an alternative way to, hey, compile this to the IR that pipelines accept, and this is some sort of a configuration option that one can do when they compile their pipelines, or
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, Metaflow basically executes Python code. So we don't have an intermediate representation.
I see.
Anyways, of course, we do sort of like AST parsing on top of the graph that has been declared in Python, and then we basically just execute that. But given that at the end of the day, whether you sort of like whatever the structure is, given that Metaflow is executing a graph and then Kubeflow pipelines executes a graph, then that sort of like, theoretically, then it's possible to sort of like compile down Metaflow into Kubeflow pipelines, which is basically the work that we did here.
So then there would be a bit of a maintainer's burden on the part of Metaflow to keep up with the IR as well,
Correct.
right?
And that's something that we sort of like then guarantee for our users, that there will always be sort of like a working version that's well tested So we already do this with sort of like a few other projects as well.
Cool. This is very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think this is great. Like a couple of questions. So first of all, what kind of primitives Metaflow has to manage the components? Because, for example, Airflow has operators,
Mhm.
Flight has tasks, KFP has components, right?
Mhm.
Which same thing we have in the Metaflow. Is it decorators or something else?
Yes. So basically, when you look at the any of these flows, so I mean, decorators, these are basically sort of like a UX construct at the end of the day. And
Mhm.
one feature that we are currently working on is basically sort of like offering other UXs as well to sort of like define these flows so that you're sort of like not necessarily tied to this sort of like specific mechanism as well. That work should sort of like see the light of the day next month or so. Now, behind the scenes, it sort of like, totally depends on what the backing infrastructure actually sort of like supports. So, for example, let's say when it comes to compute, we support a few different targets. We support Kubernetes cluster as a target where we end up sort of like running Kubernetes jobs and pods directly.
Mhm.
We support Slurm, where we'll run sort of like Slurm workloads for you. We support sort of like proprietary cloud compute primitives like AWS Batch as well. So we basically sort of like then manage sort of like a universe of these integrations
Mhm.
that sort of like, just depend on sort of like whatever construct is coming in at the end.
Yeah, is there a way for users to bring their own tasks? Like, KFP has a concept of components, right?
Mhm.
Which I can register as a user and then, give to my customers to play with.
Yes. So you're able to basically sort of like compose your flows with sort of like tasks that may be sort of like coming from elsewhere
Hmm.
versus, let's say, something
Hmm.
you may have sort of like written.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like, speaking about Flight, right? Because I guess, many also folks exploring this as as a tool to orchestrating their workflows because it's easy to use. So
Mhm.
have you done any kind of, sort of, like differences between Flight project and, when people should choose those tools?
Yeah,
Um,
so I mean, from our point of view, the way we sort of like look at the universe is, let me actually showcase this. So this diagram might sort of like clarify. So our sort of like perspective with Metaflow is that if you're doing anything with ML or AI, then at the end of the day, as an organization, you need to care about all of these different layers of the stack. You need to figure out like, how are you managing data? You need to figure out how are you managing compute. So this is basically where Kubernetes comes in. Then you need to have a question of like, okay, like how are you thinking about orchestration? How does sort of like versioning and experimentation sort of like come in? And then what is the perspective on sort of like, how are you actually deploying these models and using these? And then how are you actually training these models, right? And now if you take, let's say, a perspective of a researcher, what they really care about is having sort of like the most amount of flexibility at the very top. They don't want a platform to come in and say that, hey, you can only train these models, or if you have to sort of like do something, then you have to sort of like contort yourself in a specific style to get sort of like anything done. They couldn't care less in many ways in terms of how the compute is being managed or how data is actually being stored. Of course, it matters at the end of the day, but given a choice, they really sort of like want that freedom of choice and flexibility there. But from an infra standpoint, it's sort of like, in many ways is very lopsided as we sort of like start to go around building this, because on the modeling side of the house, of course, you can plug a lot of open source libraries and sort of like, provision an ecosystem of that. But we do have to sort of like end up managing sort of like what the data platform looks like, what the compute platform looks like, what the orchestration systems and the versioning systems look like as well. And our perspective with Metaflow is that most companies, they have basically made some investments in this ecosystem already. So we are not coming in and saying that, hey, if you have to use Metaflow, then you have to basically install a parallel AI ML stack in many ways. So you can sort of like work with what you already have until unless you need sort of like, something else, maybe sort of like your needs change and your scale changes and something that sort of like prompts that move. When it comes to some solutions like, let's say, Airflow, Argo workflows, then many of those sort of like, maybe sort of like are squarely in the orchestration bucket. When it comes to, let's say, Kubeflow pipelines, that may be sort of like, more in the versioning and orchestration side of the house, but on the compute side as well, I would sort of like posit that Flight might be sort of like in a similar area as well. So that's how we basically sort of
mhm.
like look at the entire universe, that it's very difficult to build all of these layers from the ground up from scratch and then sort of like offer that as a composed solution. So rather than sort of like take that approach, we want to basically figure out what are the best in class solutions out there and then just sort of like, integrate those so that then people have sort of like an open-nated stack available for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Basically, as a client library, it's like, basically meets, like platforms and users where they are, give them interfaces to orchestrate those, like ML capabilities.
Correct. And the
Yeah.
infrastructure footprint for Metaflow is quite low, and that's sort of like by design, and that sort of like, allows us to scale out to really massive scale workloads.
Just question for Seven. Obviously, I think you had one or two more things to show as well, but maybe just like for the sake of the community, is there a specific ask that you have for us? And like, what are you hoping to get out of working with it? I mean, obviously, you can use Kubeflow pipelines without talking to us, but or anything. But like, what are your hopes here? Like, what's the best case for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, like David Aronchik had reached out to us 5, 6 years ago when we had open source Metaflow, just like, engaging with us, trying to figure out if there is sort of like a possible integration that we could do. And we have been always sort of like driven by customer demand. If there are sort of like users in our community who are sort of like asking for it, then we sort of like go ahead and execute on that. So that has been clearly the case in sort of like early this year. And one question here from the community would be like, how often do you get sort of like asks on different capabilities on the Kubeflow SDK side of the house? And is there sort of like something that the two communities can sort of like do together on that front? So that's sort of like one area. And then the second one is, of course, we do have sort of like product feedback as we sort of like went around doing this integration. And we are happy to sort of like open issues on GitHub. But before we sort of like did that, just wanted to provide sort of like everybody context on what is it that we are actually sort of like trying to achieve here. Yes, you may.
Okay, I have I'm one of the maintainers on KFP, so just like to say that we 100% welcome that feedback. Please bring that forward. We also have our KFP community call tomorrow, so you're welcome to join and propose your feedbacks there if you want to do it in a community setting. I have just one more question for you from my side. I'm trying to put my mindset. I'm not as familiar with the Metaflow, so just correct me if I get anything wrong. But from what I'm understanding is that you have users that are using the Metaflow SDK or Python package to write their pipelines, workflows, whatever you want to call them, and you have given them now this ability to compile them down to a KFBIR and submit them to a KFB instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kind of like what is it that kind of motivated this? Did you see this sort of ask coming across from your users often, or like, because I'm trying to see like why wouldn't your users just, for example, submit the pipeline to Metaflow, or why not just use the KFP DSL and submit it to KFP itself, right? So
Yeah. Excellent question. So I think you can imagine sort of like, there are a lot of companies who have Kubeflow and Kubeflow pipelines already deployed for multiple years and have good number of workloads running on top of that stack. And that stack has been sort of like, working out really sort of like well for them. But then at the same time, they also have sort of like a strong affinity towards adopting something like Metaflow that sort of like, really accelerates how quickly their researchers are able to iterate and experiment. And now one sort of like approach would be that, okay, there is some work that has sort of like happened on the Kubeflow side of the house, and let's sort of like, continue on that front, and then let's sort of like spin up a brand new Metaflow stack. And sort of like, then there's some work that happens on the Metaflow side, and then some work sort of like, that happens on the Kubeflow side of the house. And then you run into the split brain problem where now you're sort of like, you're managing two stacks. Nobody sort of like, wants to do that in any sense of the word. And that always sort of like, then prompts this question from folks where people are like, hey, Metaflow is at the end of the day running a graph. Many of these systems, they accept a graph. So can sort of like Metaflow sit on top of this ecosystem? And this was basically the exact sort of like reasoning that prompted our Airflow integration a couple of years back. And there are like some companies like Zillow and others who have actually been maintaining sort of like a separate fork of Metaflow that actually integrates with KFP. So when it comes to being able to run Metaflow workloads on top of your KFP stack, this is not net new work in the sense that there are sort of like other implementations that have existed for a long time that people have been sort of like using for a while. So then we decided that, okay, this is time to sort of like make it official and have it sort of like running.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to demo before we've only got a couple minutes left?
Yes. So very quickly, let me sort of like, just show you a very simple example. So I have this linear flow. It is a 3-step flow, and I can basically sort of like, just run this locally if I want to. And you can imagine sort of like, now Metaflow assigns it a run ID and now it's sort of like, starting to run. And each of these tasks are now sort of like running locally in sort of like this scenario. And now if you looked at this, Metaflow supported sort of like this data transfer from within steps. That doesn't seem much because everything was sort of like running locally. But if I, let's say, went here and did add Kubernetes and Metaflow. Then basically what's going to happen is that now in this case, the start step is again sort of like just going to run locally. So nothing would have sort of like changed here. But now the step A is actually going to run in the cloud. So it's now sort of like launching a pod. So it will automatically package up your code, make sure that sort of like the prior state is made available in the pod and everything. So it sort of like, allows you to move between Kubernetes and local sort of like in a very sort of like seamless and straightforward manner. So let me just exit out of this. So if I do from Metaflow import run, and then if I just did, let's say, run, so this is my linear flow /32, then I could do, so I had a step A, and that step A had some, it had a task, and then that task had some data. So it had, let's say, myvar. So you have basically sort of like, full access to the prior state that's sort of like captured and made available to you. And then
Sorry, can I ask a quick question? So this state you said before, right, is we have sort of, like a storage dependency, right? Where you store the states of the
so
steps.
the storage, this gets stored
Is it
in
Redis or you have,
blob storage.
managing some?
No, blob storage, because this can be
Okay,
sort of like
okay.
huge blobs of data as well.
Okay, makes sense, makes sense.
And then you just do, let's say, Kubeflow pipeline create. And then basically when you hop into your Kubeflow environment, then you can sort of like see many of these pipelines show up here. So this is basically what we just deployed. And you can also sort of like create a run here and you can start it here. So now this is sort of like exactly the same thing that you saw there. And of course, in the Metaflow UI, you have access to all your local executions that sort of like happen, as well as when this sort of like starts running in a short while, then this will also sort of like show up in the Metaflow UI as well. So while this runs, the other thing that I would capture here is, so you can imagine sort of like, let's see, I can do this. Yeah, so I basically, so there's another flow that I ran a while back called debugflow.py. So if you go to runs here, you would see that I have this flow, debug flow, that basically sort of like failed in step B. And the reason why it failed in step B was because I was trying to, let's say, cast a string to an end. So we expect it to fail and it failed here. So imagine sort of like, middle of the night, your pipeline fails and you're trying to figure out why did it fail. So you can very easily sort of like just resume your compute from, let's say, an execution that actually happened on top of KFP. So with this resume command, what will happen is that will sort of like copy over the state for you from sort of like blob storage, because we are sort of like storing everything that is needed for sort of like rerunnability and reproducibility. And then we'll basically sort of like start running your workload from where it failed. So that way, sort of like you can replicate not only sort of like stuff that worked, but you can also replicate everything that sort of like failed as well. So that's sort of like, another feature that sort of like a lot of our users actually like quite a bit. I know we're out of time, but there's like a bunch of other features as well that we sort of like offer to our end users. So for example, let's say if you want to specify package dependencies, then you can sort of like specify those directly alongside your steps, and then we'll basically sort of like take care of containerizing those and making sure that all the virtual environments, everything is sort of like set up correctly. If you want to sort of like deal with checkpointing, then we'll sort of like, take care of that for you. We have a very fast sort of like storage interface as well that will maximize your network throughput, so that if you are loading large data sets from blob storage, then you're not sort of like, leaving any performance on the table. And yeah, bunch of functionality around sort of like how, if you want to, let's say, embed any kind of visualizations or monitor sort of like how your tasks are behaving, then you can have these custom visualizations as well. And now all of that sort of like runs on top of the Kubeflow ecosystem. And of course, this was the execution that happened here. I know I'm out of time, but happy to take questions, but there's one more topic after me. So I don't know how you want to
I
make
just
it.
wanted to say, like, if there's more where we can read about it, if you've made a blog post or something where people can learn more about this integration, I would plug that in chat or something, or in the meeting notes.
Yeah,
it
yeah.
also,
So we're
yeah.
yet to write the blog post. This is like fresh off the oven. The Python package release went out, the very first release went out just a few hours ago. So there will be a blog post quite soon. There is some documentation that now exists in the official Metaflow doc site. So I I think I need to sign up to be able to.
Just paste it in the chat for now, but yeah, you can join the Kubeflow Discuss on your Google account and comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We've only got like 1 minute, so I should
Shall
probably.
we have a deep dive for the KFP call, like 7 if you're available? Because I think this is great. Like I would love to, have a follow-up conversation if you're available. I think, Kubeflow pipelines place is a great, topic for us to talk about. And so,
100%. Please feel free to join. We have a call tomorrow. You can plug in your agenda item and we can continue discussions there.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. Thank you
Thanks
for
so
the
much,
demo.
Seven. Yeah, it's a great demo. I know over time, I can quickly share like, this update for Spark operator announcements, and we can, maybe wrap up if you're
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say that, like, we want to, in 2026, we send an announcement that we're going to have a new regular course called Spark on Kubernetes, because we know, like, we kind of like want to figure out, we need to have a place for folks to talk about data on Kubernetes, because data is extremely important story for ML, and many people kind of like underestimate what does it mean to actually run those workloads with this Trino, Flink, Spark, other technologies like data fusion, Gluten, or like all other things we've been really discussing. We want to give place for folks to talk about those things, and especially for people who migrating from old systems like Yarn or Hadoop to Kubernetes these days. So we're gonna like kind of generalize our discussion in a more, like Spark focus, not only on Spark operator, but also, MCP server. We also do have, distributed cache of data fusion. We want to talk about those things. And we will talk about how we make easier for folks to run Spark on Kubernetes, to run large scale data processing. So those calls will start from January 6th, sorry, January 9th at I think 9 a.m. PST on Friday. So if you want to get involved, please, register to those regular calls, and we're definitely going to share more updates, during those discussions. But in general, like, having a place for people to talk about data on Kubernetes, I think is very important, and I think we can be in a community who can drive the adoption of those tools. Yeah. Any questions for this?
So the new meeting is Fridays?
Yes, it's Friday, and the first one will be January 9th. So I linked the meeting notes, or yeah, here in the Google Doc.
Okay. And then I guess register for the meeting in the using the LFX link.
Yeah, and we also renamed the Slack channel to Spark on Kubernetes. So if you want to get involved, please join us in CNCF. We will share the updates there as well.
And I think we've a couple minutes over, but do you want to just briefly talk about this thing? Someone added this. I don't know if this was you.
No, it's fine. Like again, I just want to, remind everyone that there is a work stream to support Spark client within Kubeflow SDK. So folks can, submit interactive Spark sessions and also Spark batch jobs. And I think this is pretty cool because this will give users unique experience to run interactive Spark within their Python environments. It could be from notebooks, it could be from your pipelines, like we just talked about Metaflow. It could easily be run within Metaflow tasks, I would imagine, which can trigger the Spark job, or it can run with KFP as well. So there are a lot of discussions here, and I think when initially we want to support interactive Spark sessions using the Spark Connect CRD, but we will also support the batch jobs with the Spark application CRD as well. So it's pretty exciting work going on. So please get involved with
Definitely
these work
discussions
streams.
for notebooks because we have plan. I really want to have these ideas of these like resource meshes
Yeah.
notebooks where presumably you could make a cluster that is persistent and starts and closes with your notebook. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the something that we've been not
Yeah,
like
I think so. I think you're right. So I know you want to have a login node from Kubeflow
particularly for Ray,
notebooks.
Slum, and we're talking about MPI ones as well. But then but if you want one with we also had on the list Spark operator managed Spark cluster. Right, and the idea is to inject the auth automatically into your notebook. Effectively, you can connect meshes of resource, whether they be remote Slurm clusters or things like that, to your notebooks. Because yeah, there's Slurm is more complicated, but with stuff like this, it's pretty straightforward.
Yep.
So
Yeah. And again, like we already have integration with notebooks using the Enterprise Gateway, Jupyter Enterprise Gateway. But I would love from you guys again, if you have some architecture diagrams to take a look, like how do you see these integrations? Because again, people use Spark with notebooks differently these days, right? And we already have integration in the documentation, right? Yeah, but like if we want to, I think we definitely should consolidate this effort moving forward, Matthew, especially with the API, because there is also work for us to support Flux, which is another HPC tool to run API flavor of basically to bootstrap API. And we eventually also want to support Slurm within Trainer. So I think so the work stream that you guys are doing should at some point be consolidated with us, so we can have some sort of CRD which you can connect to the notebook, for example, right? Which we called about train clusters before, right? Which could be a Slurm cluster or API cluster. Yeah, so we can follow up with this if at some
yeah,
point.
it's
All right.
just we have to talk about it more. But yeah, like so for this, is this PR merged or no?
No, I just like looking for feedback from community. If you have any, if you can provide any suggestions or ideas, that would be super helpful for us.
Okay, cool. I think we're probably a bit over time. Anyone else got anything they urgently need to talk about? Okay, I think the next meeting is literally on Christmas, I think, or something, right? Like, so I'm not sure that that will happen. Oh no, maybe not. It's just 2 days before Christmas, so it might happen then. Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, thanks everyone. Let me
Yes,
stop.
guys. Thanks for the demo. See you soon.